Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio, the comics podcast for geeks who wonder if Trump's illegal war on Syria is actually a renumbering of all the other illegal wars the U.S. government has been waging, just with a different and dumber editor-in-chief. Tonight we'll be discussing DC Comics series Deathstroke. Slade Wilson, a.k.a. Deathstroke, may be the worst dad in the DCU, but the solo series he stars in is one of the most critically acclaimed current comic series. It's by legendary Black Panther writer Christopher Priest and a murderer's row of artists like Larry Hama, Carlo Pagulayan, Cary Nord, Diogenes Neves, and Bill Sienkiewicz. Deathstroke is full of geopolitics, dual sword-wielding violence, poor sexual decisions, Byzantine plots, and Episcopalian philosophy. So join us for a deep dive into the current series with our esteemed guests. Hub is the writer, producer, and co-host of Tighten Up the Defense, a podcast that covers two entirely unrelated Bronze Age series, The New Teen Titans and The Defenders. It is the podcast that offers plausible alternative histories for what the fuck Dr. Strange's manservant Wong was doing off-panel, if only the comic wasn't too racist to show it in the first place. Hello, Hub.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. I adore the podcast, so... And you obviously have the Bronze Age chops that offer some of the background to be discussing the series today.
Oh, thank you.
And Leslie Lee, the third, is a writer and host of the podcast Struggle Session, a podcast that takes a leftist look at the reactionary wasteland of American politics. His Struggle Session podcast covers a range of popular culture and news, and recently observed that war hawks in the media seem like they're pretending to be characters from The Wire, which is a very timely observation, so to say. Hello, Leslie.
Hello, thank you for having me. I just want to say off the start, Slade did nothing wrong.
Oh, no. I also enjoyed your Black Panther episode, I should add, as well, speaking of people who did nothing wrong. And also doing nothing wrong is our final guest, friend of the show, Spencer Ackerman, is an aspiring comic and senior correspondent for the Daily Beast. As the U.S. National Security Editor for The Guardian, Ackerman was part of the Pulitzer Prize-winning team reporting on Edward Snowden's NSA revelations, and as a senior writer for Wired, he won a National Magazine Award for reporting on Islamophobic counterterrorism training at the FBI. Hi, Spencer.
Hi, Elana, and none of that was as impressive as your renumbered illegal wars intro to this episode.
Thank you. I wrote it when I thought you might have to bail on us due to any illegal war in Syria. So thanks, you guys. So a little bit about the structure for our listeners. We're going to kick off by talking sort of generally about why we like the series so much. Probably the next eight or so minutes we'll talk about that, and that will be spoiler-free. That's just going to be to get you excited about reading the book. And then after that, we're going to talk all the spoilers in the world up until the most recent issue, which is issue 30, which just came out today. And we will finish the podcast discussing issue 30. That way folks who haven't had a chance to get to their local comic store yet will be able to listen to the vast majority of the show without worrying about spoilers. So let's have it. I came to this series in the first place because everyone always talks about how amazing Christopher Priest is as a writer, and I've always been a sucker for villain books. But I only like villain books when you're not, I suppose the term is rubifying the villain. It's actually less, it's not so much that I like villain books, it's that I like D-list character books, like Secret Six, where you get to have a lot of freedom to write about whatever you want. So I guess for me, the end to reading this in the first place was you have a writer that everyone says is brilliant. He has a character that kind of never really quite caught with the general public, so I figured there'd be a lot of freedom to explore. And that's how I ended up picking it up, and it's been really just one of those addictive series. I would say, I know a number of you all are probably long-standing Christopher Priest fans, but Leslie, how did you end up getting into the series?
Well, it's a similar thing because I remember Priest from back in the day. Wizard was always raving about how his Black Panther was the best book on the market. They did this for years, and I like that you called him a legendary writer at the top because that's true in a lot of like the the hyperbolic sense where we say a really great writer is legendary. He's also legendary because he's like a mythical legend because he disappeared from writing comic books for 10 years. Which is just mind-boggling. He was one of the best writers at the time when he left. He came back and immediately is producing what is generally considered the best superhero book on the planet, at least as far as DC goes. But for 10 years, he wasn't writing anything. This is a guy who's full of ideas, full of talent, full of creativity, who's nevertheless kind of pushed out of the industry by all the stuff he had to deal with as a black writer, who didn't want to be known as the black writer. And Priest actually tells a story of like he was still contacted by DC and Marvel. He says like every 9 months one of them would call me up with an idea, and my first question was always, is this a black character? And every time the answer was yes, and he would turn it down because he has other things going on, and if he's going to be a writer, it's clear that he wants to be the best writer. And I'm just happy that now with Deathstroke and now he's writing Justice League, he has the opportunity to be not just the best black writer, but considered the best writer in the industry.
Yeah, and I really do think this is a number of our listeners have said this is the best comic DC is putting out, period. How did you come in on the series?
Again, I came in as a fan of Christopher Priest. I never had really connected with the character Deathstroke that much, but I heard that there was a new series that Priest was writing, and I wanted to check it out. And I also like villain books, like you were saying. And I think part of what works best about them and what made me specifically intrigued about Priest writing one is one of the things that he does really well that I always loved in his old Black Panther series is create a view of the character based on how others interact with him. So it kind of builds the legend of a character. You don't have to identify with the character. You get to learn about the character through the ancillary characters that he surrounds himself with. In the Black Panther series, it was a character named Everett Ross. But in this, you see more of Deathstroke through Wintergreen or through Rose or through Icon. It makes sense because if there's anything about it that you kind of don't want to internalize about the character, if you want to keep reading, you can just play it off as, oh, well, that's just how that person sees him. It keeps the identity of the character kind of intentionally nebulous. And part of why that works really well for a villain book is when you spend enough time with a character, you start to identify with him, whether you like him or not. And I think it keeps you from doing that.
Thank you. I needed someone to put that analysis together because I'm literally saying I hate when superhero books center a villain in ways that essentially make them the hero. It's happened so many times, and it's been to the detriment, I think, of a lot of interesting potential stories and just intellectually lazy. And this is a really cool way around it. Spencer, how did you come in on this?
So in the same boat as everyone else here, it's Christopher Priest. He hasn't written anything in forever. I don't think I was collecting comics when Priest's Black Panther came out. So I read that all in trade later when I came back to comics. And there was just nothing else that he was, contemporaneously doing really. And then I'm assuming like you all, a massive Titans fan. I have given the character of Slade Wilson so many chances. I read the New 52 Rob Liefeld Deathstroke. I really tried with him. And he really does not reward you. Honestly, even that gorgeous Marv Wolfman Mike Zeck Deathstroke, it looks beautiful, but man, that is not either of their finest work. But I also came into the book relatively late. I came in with a Defiance storyline because I was kind of not really sure I was ready to trust DC Rebirth, and quickly saw that Priest has such an amazing depth of insight as a writer both to character, to circumstance, and to pacing. And Priest quickly realized, when looking at the character throughout, his 30-odd year history, Deathstroke is a family book at heart. Priest understood that the tether between Deathstroke and the Titans, which on the surface of it, makes no sense and is one of those, absurd artifices of the genre where you can't actually ever end a story or substantially change the status quo relationship between major characters. You can only kind of ebb and flow it over time before resetting. But back from the start of Deathstroke, the tether is that Deathstroke has lost his son and he blames the Titans. And the Titans kind of see him as this, dark stand-in for a father figure. And many of them have very, difficult, complicated relationships with that. And then Priest asks, well, if Deathstroke is fundamentally a family book, what kind of family would a man like this have? And then he delves so far deep into the answers for every single one of those characters and relationships that it's an irresistible book. And it's, I know I'm sort of supposed to say, given from my background, that like I come to Deathstroke as well for, what it sort of says about perpetual warfare, and about the corruptions of coming to love killing and so forth. I kind of don't. Like, it's good that the series deals with that, but, Priest, who's also effortless at writing extremely complex geopolitics and using them to reveal characters as well as to make real and very impactful arguments about the world and how it operates, doesn't have that overshadow the book, and that's the mark of a master writer.
Yeah, that's all really true. I actually am not a longstanding Titans fan. I got reading it because I borrowed Spencer's copies of things, and I feel like one of the most astute observations I'd read about the character Deathstroke was from fellow critic and friend of the show, Eric Clevefield, who described Deathstroke as being the Captain America of the Vietnam War. And that was just one of those observations that made my jaw drop. And, obviously because of the shifting timeline of the story, they sort of situate Deathstroke in the current series as being, he's not a baby boomer. The wars he was fighting in, it seems like it was maybe Kosovo. It's hard to quite put a finger on it. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the idea that he is the Captain America of a fundamentally flawed war is exactly what I think they were going after with this. He basically has Captain America's powers. He basically got the powers in a similar way, and he is using them for completely different purposes, and is not about patriotism at all. He's about supporting himself and his own survival. Which is funny because before they started to turn Deathstroke over to Christopher Priest, there was like a piece over at CBR or something that was like, quit trying to make Deathstroke happen. Because, DC had been trying to make this a character that folks were excited about for a while and never really picked up. And this shows you that any character can be great in great hands. But I still just can't get over that description of him. And how he's sort of a dark mirror of Captain America. I don't know how much of a factor that is in the current, politics of the series, but it's very true in his origins.
Yeah, I've always liked the character of Deathstroke, like aesthetically. Like he's just a cool-looking guy, and he beats up, snotty teenagers. I've always enjoyed that. But what Christopher Priest does and what he did with Black Panther is he takes someone with a cool aesthetic who's been misused and misplaced over the years and really like delves into who this character really should be and what really makes him tick. And what he figures out with Deathstroke, I think, is that like there's this line in the book where he's talking to this superhero, and she's like, "You're a villain. You're bad." And he's like, "What are you talking about? Shut up. You sound completely naive. There's no such thing as a hero or a villain. There's just people who make change in the world and people who watch TV." And I feel like that's kind of the key element of why Deathstroke keeps doing what he does, because he doesn't know how to do anything else but kill people. And so that's how he's going to make his change in the world, how he's going to live his free life, killing people for money. He does well, as the book moves along, he kind of rethinks this ethic, this unmorality. But when you meet him originally, like, there's no moralizing about him. He doesn't really think that, like, a lot of villain books try to make the villains like opine about like morality in a way, and they have their own kind of twisted morality. But like Deathstroke isn't really that character, and Priest really understands that.
Yeah, I think part of what really worked for me as the book is when I liked it best was when it was almost like a heist book. Like, it reminded me of reading like Richard Stark's Parker novels, where you have this sociopath who is totally not even immoral, but just like not concerned with morals. Just like, okay, yeah, put those in that pile over there. I have something that I need to do, so I'm going to accomplish it. And one of the things that Priest does really well is anytime you start to care about the character, he reminds you that, no, he's awful. Like, the most jarring thing that happened is just like you start to come around, oh, he's developing this sweet relationship with Power Girl, and I like how this is going, and oh, he's basically a superhero at this point, and then he kills a dog. And I almost stopped reading the book at that point. Like, not because I thought it was bad, but just because I was like, oh, shit, I don't want to spend any more time with this dude.
I'm so glad they did that, though.
Enough interesting things are happening that it keeps you involved in it, but also does keep you at arm's distance from really going all in with this guy.
So yeah, we've officially entered the spoiler section, But yeah, I felt like this was one of the few truly earned animal killings for emotional effects in a story, because it really did serve its purpose so well. And I'm like, oh, that's so awful, but boy, did that make sense and was it necessary. And he's teaching in that moment, he's teaching Tanya that lesson, and he's also teaching us, the reader, that reminder that no, he's not here to make us feel good and to have this like big moral turnaround where everything's okay and redeemable. I mean, look, this is a guy who, this is jumping to something covered much later in the series, who, you know, in his origin story, pre-rebirth, etc., like one of the main things his character does is he rapes a tween. And then comics went on before Rebirth acting like he could be this like great anti-hero. But no, he raped a tween, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's not something you come back from. And Christopher Priest understands, like, I mean, the comic goes all into a whole thing around redemption and religion later on, but like, he's also going to be there to be like, no, I know you're going to be charmed by this competence porn, right? There's a certain amount of competence porn with any kind of super effective villain, but like, you're not going to be charmed by this. It's not okay. Let's go kill a puppy.
Could I respond to the Captain America point?
Please.
I think in a fundamental way that's wrong. I see where it's coming from, and the critique that it wants to make, basically. But the cat metaphor breaks down because, like, it's not America that makes Slade Deathstroke. And that's the only way you could have that critique really apply, is if, like, Slade was fighting America's wars, and because of it, becomes so broken and so immoral and so in love with killing that he's the monster that American militarism and imperialism ultimately makes, right? But like that's like the Punisher for, you know, particularly under Grant Ennis, and like that's a really salient and important aspect of that character, and it's also, you know, the comedian in Watchmen, which is basically like, what if we made Captain America the Joker? You know, particularly because the comedian, you know, starts off as this, you know, really violent vigilante, and then finds like, wow, he's really useful as a government assassin, and the government will just let him kill and let him be this psychopath that he wants to be. But the trouble is that's not Slade Wilson. Slade, as you know, everyone else has said, and particularly in Christopher Priest's hands, is so clear-eyed about how amoral he is.
Hello?
He's Hello? Hello?
I
still hear everyone.
Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
Uh-oh.
I still hear
think
everyone.
dropped out.
For a second? Yeah. He's here, but he is not audible.
Hello? Can you guys not hear me?
I can hear everyone.
Now we're all back. We lost you for a minute.
Okay.
You're talking about how Slade is not Captain America.
Okay, sorry. Well, I apologize if this either repeats itself or doesn't quite add up because of the drop-off. But, Slade is so clear-eyed, particularly in Priest's hands, about how amoral he is, about he's past the point where he could be considered cynical. He's just really clear about how self-interested he is and about how conventional morality, can be a tool in his hands, a weapon to better exploit his adversary and triumph over him and get what he wants. And usually that's money or it's sex or it's power. And ultimately America, to the degree Slade interacts with it, America is just an excuse for him. It's an opportunity for him to get where he already wanted to go and sort of hone himself. And that's where I think he just sort of can't be considered an evil Captain America. An evil Batman, maybe, but not really an evil Captain America.
I could kind of see the argument for either. I think being a mercenary who is in some ways the ultimate libertarian kind of embodies the darker aspects of the American dream more than if he was actually fighting for the government. If that just the fact that he is just after money and his own personal interest. Although I also do think that he works very well as a mirror to Batman, not even almost different sides of the same coin. In some ways, like as they get described sometimes, the same side of the same coin.
Yeah, I would say like he's like Innocent's Punisher. That's a capitalist, basically. Like that's what I would describe Deathstroke, and which brings it back to the Vietnam Captain America thing, because he is this machine built by the United States. He's just using it for his own ends. And frankly, that's what our politicians do every day. That's what Paul Ryan's going to do. He's leaving Washington after all the connections he's built up, allegedly working for the public, and now he's going to become a mercenary for some private companies, which John Boehner just did by signing up with a marijuana company of all things. So when he was, in Congress, he was passing all these laws to put black people in prison for smoking marijuana. But now that he's gotten out, the best offer he got from as a consulting person is from a marijuana company, and now he's all good with it again. So what I'm saying is Slade Wilson is basically just a Republican congressman at this point.
Thank you. And he does get one killed earlier in the story, but, all in good spirits. And speaking of heel face turns, like, how do you guys feel about Slade's religious conversion about halfway through the series, and then his, kind of falls from that? I had some trepidation around that. I think I was supposed to, in terms of like, do I want him to have forgiveness? I don't. I'm also not Christian, so there you go. But Christopher Priest changed his name to Priest because he's a priest, and he himself is, like a practicing Christian. This story is very much situated in the Episcopalian Church, which is interesting in some ways. Joey, Episcopalian as a young adult, Dr. Icon, a.k.a. Isherwood, a.k.a. a really bad dating decision, is active in the church. Like, what did you guys make of Deathstroke's, quote, experience, as he refuses to call it like a moment with God or whatever, that like shifted his moral compass for a while and like made him get all for a minute there?
Honestly, it kind of made me get off board with the book a little bit. I thought it was very well executed, but with that and with some of the Titans crossover stories, it felt like it was almost company mandated rather than naturally what was happening with the story. And I thought it was really well executed. There's a term in pro wrestling, like he made chicken salad out of chicken shit. It felt like that to me. And frankly, I was starting to lose interest in the book a little bit during that, just because it wasn't it didn't really feel like where the book had been heading. Not that it can't evolve and change where it was going, and I think it made some interesting things while it was there, but it wasn't my favorite arc.
What I liked about it is that it's actually very realistic. If you're a true crime fan, you'll notice that many of the most notorious serial killers that have ever lived all go through a period of religious mania. And that is what Deathstroke went through. That's exactly what happened to him. He had this encounter during the annual, and where he didn't say he meets God, but something to that effect, and he goes through this period of religious mania. Now, of course, he's using this from the very beginning for his own ends. He wants to be forgiven. He wants something out of it because that's who he is. He's a psychopath, sociopath, and so everything he does is for his own ends. But that's not uncommon. Religion often attracts people who use it for their own ends. And like literally, this is what like dozens of the biggest serial killers go through, this exact same period of fervent religiosity, just like they may go through a period of fervent drug or alcohol addiction. So I thought it was par for the course. I thought it was interesting to have that, phase of being a psychopathic murderer come into a superhero comic book.
Yeah, I can see that. And honestly, part of maybe why it didn't click with me as much was because during those, I wasn't reading the crossover issues. So I was maybe just missing part of the story as it evolved, but it didn't resonate with me as much as some of the other stuff, especially some of the pre, and frankly, although it's a very small sample size for this, post stuff with that storyline.
Yeah, I got lost in the crossover stuff. Spencer, I feel like you were super onto the crossover stuff.
The Lazarus Contract I absolutely adored and thought it was a fantastic story, even though I have a big question that's just the donut hole of it for me. My concern with the religious thing, and I'm absolutely not equipped to judge it, is that I don't, okay, so we see Deathstroke use Tanya's religion as an emotional weapon against her, right? Like he literally quotes scripture to say that Tanya is a bad Christian if she doesn't let this manipulative asshole back into her life, right?
He brings her a puppy,
Yeah, which he murders. And like so then he goes through the Speed Force, comes out, like quits being Deathstroke for a little while, assembles Defiance, and ultimately, as inevitably, we end up back with Deathstroke, the killer, and the deceiver. And I don't know what the point of making him religious was supposed to be. Like we establish, particularly in the Jericho talking head scene at the beginning of the Lazarus Contract, that like, as I think Elana, you used the term competence porn, that Deathstroke is so super focused on what his target is, obsessively, that looking at him in terms of morality is besides the point. And if that's the case, and he becomes religious, then I sort of feel like the story needed to say something more about that and what that means than maybe you guys, saw it and I didn't, but I don't really understand what the point of it was, and that kind of has stuck in me since.
But you felt like the crossover stuff with the Titans, like that story did work for you.
Yes, I mean, okay, so the big thing that I didn't read
it, so sorry.
I really loved it. I haven't, I've been, Hub, I'm very interested, everyone, I'm really interested in your thoughts on this as longstanding Titans fans, and Elana, that you've basically dove into the seminal, works of him. I haven't really had many Titan stories work for me in like a wholehearted way since Jeff Johns did Titans of Tomorrow with, I think it was Mike McCone. And that's nearly like 15 years ago. And Lazarus Contract touches on like all of these wonderful Titans moments and like seminal Titans Deathstroke moments, connects the character back to his origin and his connection to all of these characters, connects it as well with like this big, post New 52 or post Flashpoint arc that Wally West is on, and its impact on like the entire DCU, and gets you into this like really, I don't know if you can curse on this show. Can you curse on the show?
So much cursing.
It gets into like this deeply fucked up story about like Deathstroke desperately trying to save the first Ravager, who he's like the most toxic possible father to. And then on the other side of it, we get this religious experience and a very warm thing for Deathstroke, the fucked up father, because like what we ultimately learn is that the reason why, like, it's a retcon of the reason why Deathstroke, who's so great at killing, never actually succeeds in killing these teenagers, which is that he makes this deal with Nightwing to defer the contract that Deathstroke has with Hive in order for Nightwing and the Titans to raise Rose as Ravager and like make her a good person and not like Deathstroke. So you think like, oh, he's like one of those like fucked up fathers. And then it turns out that like the deal is off. Deathstroke is trying to find a way back into the Speed Force so he can like go back in time and save Ravager. And I don't understand why like Nightwing was supposed to have broken the contract, or was it that like Nightwing did everything right and like Deathstroke shouldn't blame Nightwing for the way Rose turned out. He should blame Rose, or he should blame, God forbid, himself. So like that's the part of the Titans crossover that I didn't really get, but I loved every moment of it while it was happening.
Yeah, I only read the Deathstroke part, so I was just mostly confused by what was happening.
Ditto, sorry. But you're definitely making the appeal work towards me. I just wasn't. I got confused about what else I was supposed to buy. It's the usual sort of cross Michigas. I do appreciate actually coming up with an in character, in narrative explanation for why the all deadly killer couldn't kill the bunch of teenagers. I mean, they kind of try to offer that explanation for Dr. Light later when they bring Dr. Light in for a little guest appearance. Who is also
just
one.
Let's
forget about that apparently.
One quick thing to something you said, Hub, that it seemed company mandated. I'm sure you're right. I have no reason to disbelieve it. But
I was just guessing.
It is worth noting that when you go back and reread the whole series, he seeds the idea of this Lazarus contract, Priest does, very early in the reintroduction of Rose. Like, Rose is constantly talking, I shouldn't say constantly, but Rose conspicuously talks very early on about how Nightwing trained her. Nightwing is responsible for her fighting style, and then you can sort of see in the way that she's drawn, she's very acrobatic, she's very balletic, like way more than the kind of brute force killer that Slade is, or or any of Slade or Wintergreen or even Adelaide's various companions and alter egos. So perhaps it was decided from the start of Rebirth or something like that like eventually these two or these three series we're going to have to cross over, and we're going to say something about the Titans in DC Rebirth, given that one of the main criticisms of the New 52 was that like for 5 years they basically shunted to the side what had been in many people's minds a core DCU franchise.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to pick up on what you just said about like how this is mentioned very early on. I feel like there's so much in this series that Priest saw, like he saw like the future of the series like a lot. Like there's hints constantly dropped in one issue that might be picked up on maybe 10 issues later. And I think the way that the story is told is worth talking about, because he's always jumping forward, jumping ahead, jumping backwards in ways that I never really felt disoriented by, because it always came together at the end. And he did the same thing in Black Panther. And what he said, I read an interview that he gave at the time, which basically what he was trying to do was trying to bring like Pulp Fiction into comic books. And I think he's kind of perfected that, which is something that's very, very difficult to do in a comic book, because there isn't motion, there isn't there aren't you can't use a lot of the techniques that maybe Tarantino uses to give you a clear time frame for everything, because one page may be taken part at one place and one page will be taken at another, and he'll do flashback panels too, a lot of flashback panels on a page, bringing back hints and stories, and it could be very easy to get lost. But even though he's working with like a half dozen different artists, he always keeps it grounded and understandable. I think that's one of the things that makes this book so fun, is like you'll get like to a cliffhanger, and then you have a whole issue that takes place like 2 weeks after it before you jump back and see what happens with the cliffhanger.
Well, speaking of the art, like, I didn't realize this. You're talking about Pulp Fiction as in the movie Pulp Fiction. This definitely loves to do these little individual black tiny panels with the typed-on headline title for like different subchapters, and they really do maintain that throughout the whole series. So that isn't just from here; that's from his work in general.
Yeah, it's a core part of Quantum and Woody. It's a core part of Black Panther. It's like, and you're not wrong. Like, in the same way that, like, in particular, someone, a director like Tarantino has like a very particular and instantly recognizable style, like down to the soundtrack. Like that, but no matter what book.
In Pulp Fiction.
The title cards, I totally forget. Yeah.
So the title card things are in that as well. This is all feeling very 90s to me, but like in a good way.
Well, and I want to be clear too. I had said that some of the decisions felt like they may have been company mandated. That isn't always necessarily a bad thing. Part of what I love about the way Priest writes is his almost story verse problem solving abilities, where okay, how do I take this Deathstroke character and make him do what I want to do, but still make it make sense with the previous continuity? It's that he's able to figure out a way to do these things with these previously existing characters. And like you said, with the Lazarus contract, with, okay, there's all this previous backstory of this character that don't make sense. How can I keep it that existed, but still make it make sense? It's really impressive. And it's just fun to read from just like almost puzzle aspect to it, and just being like, oh shit, he did that? That totally works. It's not free verse. It's like he's found the way to express himself within the form of a sonnet, rather than just like going all over the place with it. And in some ways, to me, that's more impressive.
I would love it if after this series is over and done with, they do an absolute edition that includes Priest's beat sheet at the outset of this book. Like, I need to know, because of, as everyone has said, just how amazingly densely plotted it is, how much all of these different arcs build on one another. He basically creates mini status quos for Deathstroke in each particular arc and all of the characters around them that, like, eventually at the end, and like, 3/5 of the way through each arc, like, becomes unstable because of the force of its own contradictions, and then builds back up into something else, including this crossover that, gets you into this sort of broader world of the Titans. And, as long as we're singing Christopher Priest's praises, and deservedly so. By the way, can I move that the Christopher Priest fandom be called something like the Congregation?
Approved.
Can we do that?
Approved. Yes. It is official now, the Congregation.
So, like, this guy, is probably most known for the groundbreaking Black Panther run. And we've got in Deathstroke a parody of the Black Panther. and it's an amazing parody. Like, so, Priest, I mean, it's kind of nuts because, you know, of Quantum and Woody, like his first major book as a writer is a humor series, but like Priest doesn't get enough credit for how funny he is and like how consistently funny he is. And if you are funny, that means you understand pacing, and that shows in the rest of Priest's work.
And just to emphasize it for folks, like we're talking about the Red Lion, who is the president for life of a small African nation. He was a reoccurring character, and certainly in the very beginning of the story. He's like, yeah, he's ruler for life of a small African nation. He has a fancy suit, too.
It looks almost exactly like Black Panther's suit. It's great.
Yeah.
I
he
really
started showing up in Justice League, too.
That's
I
sweet.
can't wait.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's awesome. I really love the Red Lion because it makes fun of like what he's most known for. Because when you read the Black Panther comic, Black Panther isn't actually the main character of the book. It's Everett K. Ross. He's the main character of the book because Priest decided that like Black Panther as a character is kind of a problematic because he's so much smarter and better than everyone else. It's hard to really make him the protagonist of the book because you're not going to root for him all that much. You need someone like more human to look at him and be in awe of him, explain him, and tell the jokes too. And so when he has this Red Lion character, who is, I feel like is kind of like Black Panther if he had to deal with like the real United States of America, because in the beginning of the series, he's being deposed by rebels supported by the United States from the throne of not Wakanda, and so he ends up getting Deathstroke's help in order to preserve that. He would have to reach out to a supervillain instead of say a superheroes.
Well, I mean, he's also doing some ethnic cleansing, so maybe the superhero side of things.
As T'Challa would do as well. T'Challa is not above that.
Oh my gosh, our listeners are going to lose their minds, but that's okay.
No, that's
okay.
Actually in Priest's book.
Yeah.
That actually is in Priest's Black Panther. They're maybe not quite going as far as ethnic cleansing, but he's very concerned about the immigration problem of people who are not Wakandans to Wakanda, and there are warring factions, ethnic cleansing going outside of Wakanda that he doesn't necessarily put that much focus on. So Priest kind of takes this character to his worst aspects, the worst aspects of Black Panther. He highlights this, and while still maintaining some of the cool stuff, because the Red Lion is still, very noble and very honor-bound in a certain sense. Like he says he's a man of his word, and he helps Slade Wilson, even though Slade tried to kill him and he tried to kill Slade, but he ends up breaking him out of prison eventually, again, to help him embarrass the United States government and retake his throne. I just think I would still read that Black Panther comic too. So kudos to Priest.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines in the whole series is really early on, where they are having, I think it's even in the first issue maybe, but he's having the discussion with the Red Lion, and line where he talks about how America will help him wipe out, once this bill passes, America will help him wipe out all of the terrorists. And Slade goes, excepting yourself, of course. And he goes, oh, no, I'm Christian. They're Muslim.
And just to build, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Just to build on all of that, like it, not only shows what a confident and dexterous writer that Priest is, that he's willing to have this character, but to build on your point, it really does seem, and I thought you put it really well, like it's actually taking the critique of Black Panther that Priest introduced to just the next couple steps further along the path that he lays out, because Priest consistently throughout his books, whenever they deal with geopolitics, is primarily concerned with saying that like these heroic villainous spectrum categories simply don't apply when we're talking about what you have to do to govern, to hold power, and what it means to do so. And, you know, Deathstroke is a much different application of that. But, you know, you see with a character like the Red Lion that, you know, he's the hero of his own story, and that's really clear. And it doesn't matter sort of what it is that that either America, you know, very transactionally will either, you know, circumstance depending, you know, stand with or stand against. That there is no really fixed moral center, and that the Red Lion is reacting against that and, like, sees himself as this, you know, as we come to see, you know, in a twisted way, bulwark between, you know, civilization and barbarism, when in fact he is the line that erodes all of that. And, like, I get, not to, you know, beat this into submission when, you know, you guys see this differently than I do, but I sort of feel like that would be the kind of scenario where if they wanted to make the critique that, you know, Deathstroke is the way Deathstroke is because the United States is the way that it is, that's where, like, you would actually have to have Deathstroke hired against the Red Lion, that, like, he's sponsored by America and, like, wants to do America's bidding and so forth, rather than the situation that he frequently finds himself in, where, like, he doesn't want to work for Hive, he doesn't want to work for governments because he says at one point, and I frankly find this against the character of Deathstroke, like, not believable in his moral universe, that he doesn't want to support perpetual war because it's foolish to think that, you know, these wars will end, or that you can kill an ideology. And, like, that seems to me more Christopher Priest talking than Slade Wilson talking, because Slade Wilson would love nothing more than perpetual war. That's perfect business for him. And that just seems like, once again, we're like, if they want to make the critique that, like, America, like, I think, like, the critique is really like America is great business for the Slade Wilsons of the world. And, like, that's different than saying that America made him. I'm not saying that, like, America doesn't make Slade Wilsons. It makes tons of them. It makes people like Eric Prince, who, like, makes it, you know, a giant multi-billion dollar industry. It just seems like Deathstroke himself is not a character who's making that argument, but one who embodies a slightly more orthogonal and even kind of, I think, more morally twisted critique.
Well, I think what he really says about the U.S. government is that there's tons of ideologues in it, and he doesn't want to deal with ideologues. Like, I don't see like Slade Wilson working for John Bolton ending up well. Now, the John Boltons of the DC universe do end up creating a lot of work for him tangentially, but he doesn't want to, like, work directly with them, because that only ends up one way, with Slade Wilson being betrayed eventually, because he is not ideologue. He is just a mercenary, and he thinks all these geopolitical ideologies are just, you know, cover for people who at their core are just like him, just mercenaries too. They're just even more deranged than he is, because they think that they're the good guys.
So can I ask you a question then?
Go ahead, yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Do you think, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this. Do you think that Slade would work for Bashar Assad?
Do I think he will work for Bashar al-Assad?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
Would you take that contract?
I think at the end of the day, if the money was right, possibly. Is he going to work for Bashar al-Assad? The thing is, he wouldn't work for Bashar al-Assad to fight a rebel group. He would work for Bashar al-Assad to take out, like, a general who worked for Bashar al-Assad as well, who Bashar thinks is going to try to depose him so he can take over the Syrian government. I think that would be the Deathstroke story that would happen. It wouldn't be just him, you know, joining up with the war effort. It would be something a little bit more interesting in that. But I don't think he just doesn't. I think his objection to working for the U.S. government is that it's always going to end up with him working for someone like Amanda Waller, who will as soon kill Deathstroke as anybody else. At least there's honor among thieves, you know.
Well, speaking of this comic's usage of military figures, like his wife, Adeline Kane, who God, I wish I remembered which critic said this. I'm dying to find it. Described her as being the woman, was the most definitely divorced person in comics, Adeline Kane. I mean, I think, like when you shoot out your spouse's eye, you are definitely divorced. She works for the government. She's still in the military, it's kind of unclear to me exactly what capacity she serves. She's constantly just using her position to try to fuck with Slade's life. And, she's also just sort of exists as a really unlikable punching bag in the story. And I don't really know, what to make of the series' treatment of her in that way. Obviously the story argues that she can definitely fight because she is able to, have a real freaking tussles with Deathstroke, and she doesn't even have any superpowers. But she's, kind of just awful in ways that make me not interested in her as a character at all. And I don't know if it's supposed to be, they sometimes play up this angle with her where she's this government apparatchik who's this is how we do things. And then sometimes she's just, really that irrational, crazy wife. Got to get rid of that crazy woman I used to be married to. Ha ha. I don't know. I'm not really comfortable with it.
I liked it because it was both. Because I've thought whatever her irrationality was, it was the irrationality of the U.S. government at that point, right? So it wasn't so she's maybe the one character in the story. Oh, she's one character in the story who definitely in another story would be the hero, the noble federal agent who's taking down this killer who used to be her lover and, destroyed her life basically. And she's justified in all her anger at him, but since we're usually in, the perspective of the victims of her aggression, we see it in another light. But I didn't really think it's hard. I don't feel judgmental about her because she has of course I'm rooting for Slade, but there's a reason why he can't just take her out because he knows he's wrong. He knows he's guilty. He knows he deserves it. There's this one scene where he has the opportunity to get her locked up because he has the data disc with all the evidence of all the crimes she committed, and he could turn those in and get her locked up for life, and he throws them away because he knows that it's his fault most of all that she is how she is, not hers. He did this to her. He's responsible for it, and her behavior towards him isn't necessarily irrational or unreasonable given the circumstances.
Well, I think Trump nominated her to be CIA director.
Yes, that's exactly who she is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is interesting that she is maybe the only character in the series that is, you can see where she's coming from with some of her actions, and maybe they are justified in a certain way. At the same time, she is maybe the only character in the series that you never are tempted to identify with, even in the slightest. I mean, she's written as almost a caricature of a nagging shrew of a woman who, yes, it is her perspective makes sense, but her character is not one that you can identify with, and she's almost alone in that regard in the series.
And that's where she's kind of ashamed.
Has an ex-wife. I'll just put that out there.
and that's where it's really a shame because I think given the critique and the amorality that Priest is presenting, Deathstroke with, and that Deathstroke is the exponent of that. His children are to various degrees avatars of where that sort of amorality, both as a parent and as a kind of inherent descendant and bearer of the legacy of that, break off in different ways. And because of that, you do want Adeline to present a different, and Wintergreen is his Alfred, so he's this sort of regretful, also betrayed, but codependent father figure / manservant, squire or something like that. And that's where you kind of do need Adeline to be just, standing for some argument, making some point beyond sort of being, an evil Miss Piggy, coming to, barrel down in a truck to, avenge the fact that she's scorned. Alana, I think, you're right when you say, basically, she's fundamentally just sort of a woman scorned, and they don't do more than that, and they kind of just, unfortunately, Priest allows her to not have much more depth than that, and as everyone else has said, be a kind of unlikable character, and it's a waste, and it's not fair.
So
I think it's fair because she's a Fed and she deserves it.
But they don't make her. But that's the thing, right? Like they don't make her really be a like. She's a Fed she's a Fed because of what she does. She's like they don't do enough to establish that she's a Fed because of who she is, right? Like you just sort of see her behavior, okay, so like an example in a totally different comic, like it's evil that like Eric Larson made the Savage Dragon, like his uncomplicated hero, a Chicago police officer, and doesn't really deal with that. Like, you don't see the Savage Dragon like constantly torturing black children, right? Like the Savage Dragon doesn't have like essentially like a warehouse where like it's that kind of thing where like they're playing with a critique and they don't realize it, or they don't really develop it, or they don't appreciate, what they have. And like I sort of feel like that's the thing with Adeline Kane. Like you need her to really be a Fed, like be a Fed like in her bones, like to show like Adeline Kane was involved. Like you would say like she was really great as a torturer at a black site. And that's how she got to where she got. Like, you need to have her be Gina Haspel if you're really going to have her ultimately say anything beyond the fact that, like, she's a Fed. She seems like a Fed because it's a plot device, because it's a way of, like, bringing in more action to this and having, like, the other side, the mommy half of the family, but not really making it. Like, it's not just that we don't see Adeline as a point of view character, and we don't come to identify her with her. It's because they never, like, Priest never gets around to establishing what she's supposed to really be, a stand-in for. Like, she doesn't say anything with that character, and I think that's a weakness of the book.
Well, you mentioned Chicago real quick. I do want to talk at least briefly about the famous Chicago gun violence issue, where they brought back Creeper. God, I fucking love the Creeper, just on aesthetics alone. So that issue, came out definitely referencing not just the, gun violence in Chicago, but also definitely it came out in the context of the murders of gay club patrons and the Pulse massacre. And it was definitely one of the most, like, this is an issue comics of the whole series. How did you guys feel about it?
I really liked it because I liked where it ended up, where Priest basically judged a whole lot and said, both sides of the, like, so you have these mothers of children who are slain who hire who they think is Deathstroke to kill the black gangbangers who kill their children, right? But like in the book, it's made pretty clear, like, that's not necessarily a good thing, killing other black people for killing those children to get revenge on them. They also bring out, the cops and the good gun owners, the white gun owners who get guns for protection, and show that that's not necessarily a good thing. And at the end of the story, basically Deathstroke's solution is, what should really happen is that you should teach gangbangers how to shoot better so that they don't catch anybody with strays, because then no one would care. And I really liked where that ended up, because there was a couple of points in the issue where I was like, this is kind of making, somewhat reactionary arguments, but Priest was having a dialectic in it, and I could see that he really is not on either of the sides on the narrow bandwidth of the conversation we have about gun violence in reality. He's kind of outside of this, or at least with definitely Deathstroke is completely outside of this. His solution has nothing to do with either side, and I really liked where it ended up, because it brought in a lot of more nuanced aspects of the talk about gun violence that you won't even see on like a MSNBC, certainly not a CNN, and ends up in a place that's a lot more interesting, a lot more fun, and fit the character.
Carl, I have a question for you specifically as the teen titanologist of days past.
Okay.
How do you feel like the comic has treated Joey, aka Jericho? Like, what do you feel like this characterization is interesting?
I'm kind of conflicted about the character in general. Honestly, I haven't read, like, these issues of Deathstroke are the most of the Joey Jericho character that I've read. I'm reading the series for the podcast as we go. I read all of it at one point, like about 5 years ago, in an almost like fugue state, and just don't remember most of it. The portrayal of Joey in this comic book, I think, is interesting, and I like that they're presenting him as a flawed character who isn't necessarily evil, and that actually jibes with most of what we've known about the character. Part of what I like is I think that it's interesting, at least, that there's a point where you can present a character who is groundbreaking in a way in his portrayal, in this case as a bisexual character, and not have to present them as a Mary Sue type character, but also not have them be the villain. I think that's really interesting. There are aspects of the character that are definitely problematic, but I honestly wish I could answer this better, because I don't have as much knowledge of the previous Jericho character as I probably should.
I like this Jericho a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt like if you're going to do, okay, so like let's start with Jericho as like we first meet him in the Judas Contract, right? Like he's been Deathstroke's, you could argue, ultimate victim, because like Grant's death doesn't like there are lots of reasons, there are lots of things to blame before you blame Deathstroke, even though you should blame Deathstroke as well.
Right. Grant did this to himself first and foremost, and then second off Deathstroke, and third was time, maybe. I don't know.
And like I want to come back to the Hive Deathstroke relationship a bit later if we can, but you know, okay, so that's we see Joey as like the kid who nearly dies because Deathstroke has this sick fixation with being Deathstroke. And like when we see him in Judas Contract, Wolfman and Perez do him like he's Deathstroke for excitement. Like he comes home from the war and he like can't really leave it. Like the thrill of it, despite the fact that he was in, you know, a tiger cage, for God's sake. Like he really becomes this kind of like sick, Rudyard Kipling-esque, uncomfortable soldier of fortune. And it's Grant who pays the price, and Annaline pays the price and like shoots his eye out. And like Joey can't ever talk. But then when you see Priest draw him, his eyes are super big and super wide. He's such a loving and open character. And, you know, women love him. He's super empathetic. He's clearly very giving, despite the fact that he's not able to talk. He's the gentlest of the Titans. Eventually, like, you know, back when they started doing, like, the weird stuff in 1990 and 91, like, he flips out and becomes, like, sort of Dark Phoenixes. But, like, nevertheless, like, that's sort of Joey as we come to see him. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, they just sort of have him be Deathstroke's son without really taking into account what that would really mean. And Priest really takes that into account. And you see, like, Joey is, like, the competent son who turned out as well as any of these people were going to turn out. And, like, one of the things that, you know, he does is, like, seduce and break the heart of his dad's best friend and, like, father's surrogate. It's, like, an incredibly ugly Oedipal thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I still put that on Isherwood at a certain point. Like, we don't really see enough of what actually happened between the two of them
I had difficulty trying to identify or care about the character of Isherwood after he has an affair with this guy who he's known since he was a little kid.
He was a child.
Yeah.
And you can totally look up to people a million years older than you, but not if you've known, not if they knew
not if you're their uncle,
essentially. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
exactly. He can, he can have sex with all the 50-year-olds he wants, but not the 50-year-olds that he knew when he was 8. That's all.
Let me see if I can put it a little bit more precisely, because everyone's right here. Everyone's right here.
Okay.
I don't mean to say that Isherwood is anything but a creep. You see Deathstroke at one point, when he actually confronts Isherwood about it, he was like, Joey was a grown man and Joey knew what he wanted, and Deathstroke is like, shut the fuck up, Isherwood. It's still gross. You've known my kids since they were babies. Rose and Joey look to you like an uncle. Whatever it was that Joey wanted, it's fucked up that you did it.
Right.
But they also show that Joey very explicitly says again and again, I did this because I wanted it. I seduced you. And, they give Joey a ton of agency for that choice and show, ultimately to Joey's regret that, he does it in an important way precisely because Ish is so close to Deathstroke. And, he does this on some level to hurt his father. And it ends up literally ruining, destroying, and, it's Isherwood's fault that this happens. But, it's ultimately what destroys Isherwood, physically and emotionally, and has ultimately because Joey is still, the healthiest of all of these people. Joey comes to see that it was really deeply wrong, and how depressed and miserable he is, and in an important way unable to move on after Isherwood's death because of how guilty he feels about it. It's the first time I really felt that there was a portrayal of Joey that made sense, and that didn't again like you said make him a villain, but also showed him acting in ways that you would think that the son of Deathstroke could not help but act in.
I mean, the whole thing is super Oedipal, and the series has a lot of that in general. I mean, Deathstroke's adoption of Tanya Spears, a.k.a. Power Girl. Well, for one thing, I'm just so glad that Deathstroke remembered that there's a black Power Girl in the DCU floating out there who, someone should do something with. And I was glad that he was I will do that, because I did not forget that you guys invented a black Power Girl who's a super genius. And also was Christian, and that could make for some interesting counterpoints in the story. So salutes to you, Chris Priest, for bringing her back. But that whole thing is she's a substitute daughter for Rose, right? Because he comes and they become they develop that relationship after Rose has one of her no, fuck you, bye, dad moments. But that's still such an Oedipal relationship between the two of them, even though I don't think that he was actually going to try anything untoward. It's still coming from that same kind of thing.
And so this is the first time we've mentioned Rose, and as of all the characters in the story, a lot of you were didn't like Deathstroke's ex-wife. I actually liked her because I thought she was kind of this badass force. With Rose, she gets a lot of screen time, and I really didn't connect with almost any of it. I thought a lot of what she was going through just wasn't nearly as interesting after the initial part where it's she teams up with Batman and Deathstroke teams up with the bad Robin. I found that that was very exciting, but when it came time to where she's doing this personal journey where she was trying to figure out who she is and dealing with her issues with her father and her fiance, that story, it felt kind of dragged along. Come on, homegirl, just put on your suit and just go kick some ass. That's how superheroes deal with their trauma. They don't actually confront it. They just go and take it out on other people. And I wish she had started to do that a little bit sooner.
Well, we will come back to talk about the Deathstroke, Batman, Damian, Rose mirroring parental thing in the end of this when we talk about issue 30. But I do say definitely the issues with those crossovers in the beginning, 4 and 5, are some of the best of the series. But Rose's personal journey of with her stake among family and all that I liked it. I enjoyed it. There are definitely lines that Chris Priest put in her mouth that I can't deal with as no 17-year-old or however old she is, 18, I don't know. But whatever, she has to be 20, I guess. But nobody fucking says that. What was it? Her whole repeated I'm just using where is it? I wrote it down. It's about owning your sexuality, not giving it away. I get that she's saying that as a quote or something else she's read, but I don't believe that Rose is quoting that and saying that out loud. Her and her boyfriend are definitely having sex, and that's fine. But I overwhelmingly felt like I did like her going on to, and the way it turned out, it was all her dad's manipulation, but going on to try to connect with her mother's family and visit and spend time with Hmong community and in the Twin Cities area, etc. Sorry, I think I cut someone off there.
Oh, no. I enjoyed all of that journey as well, actually. And I liked her character for the most part, but then towards the late 20s issues, I just started getting confused because they just kept piling other things for her, and now she has multiple personalities or is channeling somebody else's personality and murdering people. And I can also see her, she was totally having sex with her boyfriend, but I can also see her trying to find a reason to tell her assassin dad that she wasn't.
Yeah, that's pretty. He points out that her trying. He points out that her feeling like she has to defend herself indicates that she's not really murdered at all. But if she feels that way that she has to say it towards you, Slade, again, that's on you. I'm just putting that as a point of I don't think that 19-year-old women, girls, whatever, say that. But
I want to
say
one
personality thing though is I think it's in 29, issue 29. They straight up say oh no, you don't have a split personality spiritual connection. You got hit in the head really bad, which is true. She did, and the delivery of that line, I completely cracked up. It was straight up this is one of the few DC comics or anything where anybody would straight up say oh no, you're just dealing with a serious head injury, which she is. That happened at her brother's wedding.
I was kind of meh on Rose for the reasons that everyone says. The split personality thing really made me sort of feel a tell that Priest doesn't really know what he wants to say with this character. He knows, I think, what he wants to say about Deathstroke in relation to Rose, which is that Rose is the child of his that he actually loves. He beats himself up over Grant. He has a kind of impossible relationship with Joey for a variety of reasons, not least of which, he is kind of, disgusted by Joey, ever since Joey's a kid and they're, having that sick camping experience to, toughen up Grant and them. But he loves Rose and sees that, when Wintergreen says, he's hiring people to kill you because he needs to connect with you. And, that's how Slade does it. That's messed up and seems a little bit too pat. But spare one thought for how awesome Rose's boyfriend, Luis, is as a vigilante, because he has one of the best and most inspired origin stories of any vigilante in any superhero universe, which is simply this: Deathstroke fucked my mom. I am a supervillain because Deathstroke fucked my mom.
There would probably be a lot of supervillains running around right now with that origin story if it was more of a personal compulsion, really. But
I'll sort of
the Brotherhood of Deathstroke fucked my mom.
I mean, that's Damien's motivation. That's why he's such a little shit.
So let's talk about that. Can folks hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I thought I went out for a sec. So, issue 5 or 6 or so is we have these amazing scenes of switched partners team up. You have Damien and Slade, where Slade is trying to break Damien down and get information from him, and Batman is trying to not just throttle Rose for being a distraction / he's secretly actually trying to get information from her about Deathstroke. Those issues are just wonderfully written. I think you have like the best line. I don't read a ton of bad books these days, and I don't really read a ton of Damien. But I would be shocked to believe if there's ever a Damien statement that's better than the following quote: "Come on in here and slash my neck, then I can be your kid too," which he literally says to Slade. And I'm just like, you're the most wonderful evil child in the world. So those issues were so wonderful that I'm not at all surprised when the series came around. And for issue 30, the teasers said, and guys, if you haven't read issue 30 yet, good night, we love you. Come read issue 30 and then listen to the rest of this. Okay. When they said that they were going to have a storyline where it's going to be Batman and Deathstroke, and they're going to be dealing with, could it be that Deathstroke is the real father of Damien? And of course, we know the answer is no. But I'm really looking forward to these just because, yeah, Deathstroke is an example of evil Batman. It's one of the reasons why our poor Dick Grayson has such a bad tendency of doing whatever Deathstroke tells him to do. And they already set up these characters as having this great chemistry and rapport in the conversations from those earlier issues. So really, like when people are saying, well, where's this Deathstroke Damien's dad thing coming from? I don't see it in any of the origin texts of the character. Like, that's completely missing the point. The point that the story is coming from is we've seen these characters have good interactions together as written by Chris Priest. And therefore, we would like to have more excuses to have interactions between them as written by Chris Priest. That's all this is about, and I'm totally happy to have it because they were delightful. So what do you guys think about issue 30? I mean, it starts off with Alfred and Wintergreen talking, and Wintergreen is obviously the dark Alfred to Batman's Alfred, and they have wonderful rapport as well. But yeah, like I'd love to hear Phil's thoughts about the most recent issue.
I loved it. I loved especially the interplay between Wintergreen and Alfred. I loved their friendship, and I love the dueling descriptions by their children of Batman and Deathstroke, and realizing that either of those could apply to either character. I just thought
Todd,
it was really. What?
Was that Jason Todd?
I honestly wasn't sure
Dick.
which Robin it was. I thought that it was Dick Grayson, but could have been any of them.
Well, it starts with, I don't know. I don't see Jason Todd saying a line like, I don't actually call him dad, but I should. He's more than earned the title. That seems like a Dick Grayson thing to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had read it as a Dick Grayson thing. But just, yeah, the line, he's not a puzzle, he's an Etch-a-Sketch. It's so good. And it totally makes sense. Like, you could totally read that as that's a description of Deathstroke, too. You want to make him complicated, but in fact, he is just incredibly efficient. And the twin description.
I read Etch-a-Sketch. Etch-a-Sketch feels to me like it's a slate that you can just wipe out and start again, and that's why I thought maybe that plus hair is why I thought maybe it was Jason Todd. I'm not a Jason Toddologist. I did not read those Batman comics for shit, but I felt like that actually sounded like a not at all flattering description.
Oh, I read it as like he is incredibly straightforward, straight ahead, and simple. And you want to make it complicated. You want to make who he is a more complicated person, but it just isn't.
I'll buy that.
I think that pairs really well with Jericho's description of, I mean, if Pop were a sous chef, he'd be the most ruthlessly efficient sous chef alive. It's just how he's wired. He takes it all the way. And I think that would be a description of Batman as well. And I really enjoyed those juxtapositions.
And about who these characters are, I really like Deathstroke's lines at the end where, Batman's kind of, doing his typical posturing. Like, you're done. Deathstroke's done. You can't do this. And he's like, I'm not some idiot who dresses like a penguin, okay? I am Deathstroke. You are operating because I allow it. Robin is still alive because I allow it. And, they don't even really have a fight at the end. They kind of just walk away from each other because they know that both of them are telling the truth, or what could be the truth, because they're both so skilled, so talented, so smart. And this is one thing that Priest does better than probably any other comic writer. He writes a character like a Batman, like a Black Panther, like a Deathstroke, a guy who is just 5 steps ahead of everyone else, better than almost any comic book writer. He shows how smart these characters are, how advanced they are, how no matter how down they might seem, they always have a plan out. And to have 2 of these characters have to face off against one another, he knows that they, in certain circumstances, they would just walk away from each other because that would be the smartest thing to do. Like, one of the funniest things that happened in the book, and also one of the saddest, is when Deathstroke gets the Speed Force and he's running away. He's running, and Kid Flash is chasing him. And at a certain point, Deathstroke just gives, I forget what the line is, but he basically tells him, like, I have the Speed Force now, so do you. But so that means that we're equal at this point. And I am the greatest killer in the world, and you're just a kid who can run fast. Now, at the same speed, what do you think is going to happen? And Kid Flash just runs away from him. Like, he's able to defeat a superhero just by psyching him out. And I thought that was just a brilliant thing. And Batman and Deathstroke at the end of this kind of psych each other out. And I thought that was just a really good illustration of what who these 2 characters are at the end of the day. And I Grant Morrison I feel like with Grant Morrison tried to do this with Prometheus, he just had Prometheus beat up Batman really easily, right? But with Deathstroke, when you get to Christopher Priest, they really just talk it themselves out of fighting each other because they know that they are equals and they're not sure who's going to win.
I want to shout out Carlo Pagulayan's art on this issue because I just thought that the faces in it were really excellent and expressive and not heinous. And those are nice things. Sorry, you were saying, Spencer?
No, well, first of all, yes. This is, I think, Pagulayan's best issue of his end of the run. It's perfectly paced. It moves exactly where the story demands. It slows down where the story demands. It's the most in sync I've seen Pagulayan and Priest on. It sort of felt to me, and I'm so excited for these next, 5 issues, that, like, this is Christopher Priest, like, reading about all of the difficulties that the Ben Affleck solo Batman movie is going through, and just sort of saying, like, oh, this is going to be a Batman Deathstroke movie? God damn it, I'm going to write it. Like, I'm going to write what this movie should be. And if you, like, there's I remember, I think it's the New York Magazine profile of him recently, that, like, Priest makes a point of saying, like, they never let me write Batman. Like, they never let me write Superman. They never let me write, like, the iconic characters. And, like, throughout Deathstroke, like, this book has functioned as, like, the sickest possible interpretation of the Bat family. And many different points in the book, subtly and unsubtly, have sort of, made it so that, like, you could sort of see this as well being, like, Christopher Priest's, like, audition reel for taking over the Bat franchise. And, one of the things that stands out to me, in terms of, like, the subtle ways that Priest has seeded all of this stuff, when we're doing the Lazarus Contract Titans crossover, like, the way that Deathstroke essentially, like, recruits Kid Flash is by knowing and preying on the fact that Kid Flash is a gearhead and, like, parks this really, like, bitching car along the path that he knows that young Wally West takes. And, like, that to me just recalled, like, Jason Todd, like, putting the Batmobile up on cinder blocks and trying to rob it. And, like, you can sort of see where, like, Bruce was not trying to manipulate some like, hoodlum into being Robin and, like, saving him from a life of crime. Whereas Deathstroke is looking at a 15-year-old and being like, I need what this kid has. How can I most effectively exploit him and get him to give it to me in a matter of least resistance, which to Deathstroke looks like mercy. And it's that kind of interpretation of like who Deathstroke is in contraposition to Batman that I just simply cannot wait to see this story develop.
I guess the problem for me is, like, that's also how I see Batman too, more or less. Like, I see him as just as manipulative as Deathstroke. Like, I really, I think this is a story that really only works in comic books, because if I want to see Batman versus Deathstroke in the movie, I want the lines to be a little bit clearer between them, especially since Deathstroke's not really established and Batman's only been in one movie and then some hodgepodge or whatever, Ben Affleck Batman. I would want to see like a more straight up story and just them like fist fighting a lot, right? But this, in this medium of comics, this serial medium where you can tell these long stories, where you can put Deathstroke in this massive context where he's a much more complicated character than any movie supervillain can be in 90 minutes or 150 minutes, however long these superhero movies are. You really can't do this in a film. You can't really capture all these nuances in a film because the audience will be confused, because you need a lot of backstory. You need to build this up. You'd be asking yourself, okay, why is Batman and Deathstroke just sitting on a dock talking to each other? Like, they should just be punching each other. That's what 99% of the audience would be asking themselves. But in a comic book, you can do that. You can have these dialogues. You can have these digressions. In a movie, you wouldn't have that Wintergreen and Alfred scene except for 30 minutes, and it would just be the quips. In the comic book, you can do more of this subtle type of storytelling.
Yeah, the way the issue ends, it makes me like I know this isn't what's going to happen, but I'm like, is this going to be like a buddy cop movie? That's kind of what I'm rooting for.
Are they going to go buddy cop on Talia al Ghul then?
Yeah, maybe League of Assassins. I can see that being like a, less racist version of a Gunga Din. You're all under arrest.
Oh, my God. Yeah, I'm not usually in the business of speculating, like, what plot points are going to resolve in what way, but I definitely say with full confidence, but also don't really care at all, like, Damian is Bruce Wayne's child. So, like, what are the pieces of this 5-issue investigation will come forward? We'll see, but I'm sure that the seeds of those will have been seeded deeply throughout the earlier work. That is really the trademark of what this. I mean, these are just these Byzantine plots that he's been building up, and it's true. I like the idea of being able to see some of his notes coming into them as well. Well, thank you guys for joining. I should probably wrap up. If there's any final thoughts about the series, let's have it.
I would say this series is incredible. If you aren't reading it, you should. You should check out Just the League by Christopher Priest. You should read everything you can by Christopher Priest. He's a really special writer who who hasn't gotten the due he deserves until now. We lost 10 years of what could have been like some of the greatest comic books that have ever been written. So go out and support him now so we don't lose out another 10 years, okay?
Yeah, I agree. His stuff on Justice League is really good right now too. And I would say if you're going back to read his earlier stuff, the Falcon miniseries he wrote when he was still named Jim Owlsley is really, really interesting and totally worth reading that stuff, and his early Power Man and Iron Fist stuff too. I think that he is probably should get more credit for making Black Panther the character that Black Panther is now, who gets to star in the biggest movie ever. I don't think that happens if you don't have the 90s run that Priest did. I love the Reginald Hudlin run. I liked the Coates run, but I think he establishes the character as who he is today more than any other writer.
And with the Justice League issues, do you think we can just start reading those from the beginning of Chris Priest taking over the series?
Yes,
yes. You definitely can.
Okay, got it. Spencer?
Another thing, I have not gotten around to actually reading it, but my wife read it. In around like 2003 and 2004, I think shortly before like Bendis kind of takes over the entire Avengers franchise. Priest does a run on a Captain America and the Falcon series that's not only super political, but is, I think, the first Marvel 616 universe series after 9/11 to start really critiquing the politics of never-ending war. My wife is a human rights activist, and she's reading this book and just mentioning me they're at Guantanamo, and just sort of can't believe that, particularly for the time in which that book came out, it's a brave critique. I have not, however, read it, so I can't evaluate it. But I think that's the sort of thing that really underscores again and again what a special writer Priest is, how uncompromising he is, how willing he is to sort of just be ruthlessly unsentimental about the world in which we live, while not being bleak in a cheap way. Everything Priest does is earned. Everything Priest presents, he shows you opposing arguments for. He takes his own critique very seriously, but not to the point where he can't see its own flaws. And there are usually characters that stand in for criticisms of that. Wintergreen is probably, both Wintergreens, the virtual one and the real one, is probably the one that does that work in this Deathstroke series. But yeah, it's a special book. It is outside probably of Garth Ennis's various treatments, most of which I think are terrible. But
I agree.
His treatments of the Punisher, whenever Ennis tells a Punisher Vietnam story, that story is really special because it takes a really incredibly honest and deeply informed and not cheap, unflinching view of a futile war and draws a critique out of it that's appropriate and not cheaply overbroad. Everything he does is earned, and Priest is probably a better writer at doing that, not just at war, but at society kind of at large. And I really hope that what we get out of both what Priest did for Black Panther, now that Black Panther is a global cultural phenomenon, what he's doing on Deathstroke and what he's doing on Justice League, is a prelude to the rest of the comics industry basically saying, take our money, write whatever it is you want to write. I will just, whatever it, I got into the Lion Forge universe because, that first Free Comic Book Day story, was very, Priest was a co-writer on that.
Yeah.
And that's a really, incredibly, promising, I love Kino, I love Noble. I didn't really get into Superb so much. The Excel book is great. Basically, it's, you see from all of these different aspects that different, even random comics that Priest touches, he enriches and makes them really special. And I hope, he just sort of does whatever he wants next.
I would just say that if folks want to learn more about the Lion Forge range, we in fact had Christopher Priest, as well as the launching some of the initial editors on the Lion Forge series on the podcast for our 200th episode. And I do recommend folks go and listen to that episode and check it out because, Lion Forge is pretty amazing, and that debut issue was fabulous. Well, I think with the support from folks on the show, I think we're this close to making the icon suit as a gravity sheath, the new official catchphrase of the DC universe. And perhaps it can be repeated ad infinitum as whether or not we are nigh invulnerable when unblasting. Because I'm telling you, they could not possibly say the icon suit is a gravity sheath more often than they do in that comic. I'm aware of that. I've not felt the need to read the word sheath quite that often previous to this comic. So I want to thank all of our guests and give you each a second to tell our listeners where they can find you on the Internet. Hub, where can folks find you on the Internet and listen to Tighten Up the Defense?
We're available on any kind of podcatcher type thing, whatever they're calling Apple Music these days, or iTunes. It's called Tighten Up the Defense, TITAN. We cover both the New Teen Titans series and the Defender series, which have pretty much nothing in common other than I like both of them. We take alternate weeks, and basically me and my brother have a couple of drinks and talk about a comic, and we have a lot of fun, and hopefully it's fun to listen to as well.
It's hilarious. It is one of the most consistently funny podcasts that out there. So I just cannot emphasize enough, folks, listen to it. And you also will come to realize things that Tori Ander, aka Starfire, actually Kaiser Sosa, her origin story from a takeout menu. I was like, oh, it all makes sense now. So thank you. Leslie Lee, where can our folks find your work on the internet?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Twitter, Leslie Lee III, and you can listen to my podcast, Struggle Session. You can subscribe at patreon.com/struggle session. We talk about comics, books, movies, games, and politics, and we talk about how, Disney, Facebook, all these companies that are giving us all this content that we love are going to own us soon and destroy our world. So, we're really, Poptimus over there on Struggle Session.
What's the next episode you guys have coming out? Do you know yet?
Yes, we're actually going to be doing a deep dive with Phoenix Kalida, who you can find on Twitter as Uppy Negress. We're talking about FOSTA and SESTA, the anti-sex worker bill that was passed almost unanimously by Congress, and how it's already putting sex workers across the country in danger. But it's still a very fun and very funny episode, even though it's about a very serious topic.
I'm really glad you guys are tackling that. It's super dire and not getting enough attention from the world at large. Spencer, where can folks find your work?
You can find me on Twitter at Ackerman, and most days I'm reporting for thedailybeast.com.
Excellent, and I hope that I won't have any horrible news of war attacks from you in the next day, but you never know. We were this.
No,
close
you probably will. You almost certainly will. Yeah.
Damn it. So yeah, definitely, guys, follow Spencer on Twitter. Then you will know when the U.S. fails to declare war on Syria, but does indeed drop things on it. And shout out to Win Without War as being a really good organization, in my opinion, to follow if you're trying to understand what actions we can take to address this bullshit. And thank my guests again. This is Graphic Policy Radio. If you came to the episode late, don't worry. You can listen to the whole darn thing by downloading it on iTunes. It's also on SoundCloud and Stitcher. Those will probably be up in about the morning. I'm Elana Brooklyn. I didn't even introduce myself. Well, I'm on Twitter all the goddamn time at ELANA_Brooklyn. And Graphic Policy is at graphicpolicy.com, comics news and reviews and essays and analysis multiple times a day, including a look at which cheesy movie villains most similar to Scott Pruitt at the EPA today. It's a very thorough evaluation, and I highly endorse reading it. So yes, that's Graphic Policy. And we'll be back with you on Monday at our usual time, which is 10 o'clock on Mondays, to talk with Jeremy Whitley, who's the author of Raven, the Pirate Princess, which is a delightful, queer, youth-inclusive romance pirate comic book that I really love and that needs more people to buy it so I can continue to read it. And with that in mind, I'll be joining our listeners on Monday. And thanks again to my guests.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.